Good morning. Today I want to talk to you about putting out the fire. Putting out the fire. Two personal experiences. When I was in a church, a big Baptist church in the UK, I just got filled with the Holy Spirit. And the Baptist church did not appreciate that. The minister told me in the coffee bar that I used to run, he said, David, you take those books out. It's just one book. 9 o'clock in the morning, take it out. I don't want it in here. It was talking about the Pentecostal experience, the fire of God coming down. I felt very bad about it. And I went upstairs from the coffee bar, which I was managing, and the fire of God just hit me. Fire on David. And they wanted to put the fire out. Well, I had to leave the church. They told me to leave. Years later, that was in 1972, by the way, years later when I was in France, I was in another denominational church. And in this denominational church, we had a church meal. Everything was going fine. They knew I was filled with the Holy Spirit. Quite a few people were. But we had a church meal. And in that church meal, in the big gardens of one of the people in the church, he had a pool and he had big gardens and tables and so on. And I met a lady on my table called Christiane. Now she was shaking. She couldn't drink her water without trembling. So the Lord told me she'd had an operation in the first 5 years of life. And I asked her, did you have an operation? She said, yes. How did you know? I said, I don't know anything, my dear. I just listened and I tell you what I hear. And she said, well, I had a brain tumour at 6 months. And I said, well, during that period of anaesthetic, a demon came in and it caused you nephritis. And that's why you're trembling. Wow. Well, she was wanting to know about that. But the following evening, no, the same evening, she got delivered in my friend's flat. And I prayed for her and she was ecstatic. Of course, she came to church. And what did she do? She told everybody. What did she say? The Englishman prayed for me. Oh, wrong thing to say in a French church, especially a French denominational church. The English, I was called by the elders the next Tuesday, and I was told with a finger in my face, you no longer pray for the sick in my church. I thought it was the Church of Jesus Christ, but obviously the denomination thought it was their church. So, guess what? I was thrown out again. I get used to it, and I think in total I've been put out from 9 different denominational churches. So you can see I'm quite experienced in this area. It could go in the Guinness Book of Records, maybe. I want to read to you a verse from 1 Thessalonians 5, and it says, quench not the spirit, despise not prophesying. Quench not the spirit and despise not prophesying. Just going to reach over and get my Passion version. And it says in the Passion version, never restrain or put out the fire of the Holy Spirit. That's what my Passion version said. Never put out the fire of the Holy Spirit. Now, the Holy Spirit is allowed to move in churches where they allow prophecy. Despise not prophesying. The big chapter in the Bible where the Apostle Paul went into details of how a church service should run is 1 Corinthians chapter 14. Now, in that chapter, he goes from verse 26, the use of spiritual gifts, and he says in there that let the prophets prophesy one by one. In verse 31, let the prophets prophesy. If you don't let the prophets prophesy in a church, then basically you are running in with fire extinguishers, spiritual fire extinguishers. Probably the elders or the deacons will be there ready. Anybody tries to prophesy, this happened in another church where I think it was Veronica, or maybe it was me, we realised that the only person allowed to prophesy was the minister's wife. Everybody else, no prophecy allowed. The Holy Spirit could not move in that church as in many other churches. Now, when the fire of God comes down, it sanctifies us. It takes out those things in our life, those characteristics, habits, and things that we're wrong in. It takes it out of our life and purifies us. We get sanctified. And without that sanctification, we do not provide the atmosphere for the glory of God to come down. Let me see if I can find 2 Chronicles fairly quickly. 2 Chronicles is when Solomon dedicated the temple. It's 2 Chronicles chapter 7. I should have had the reference marked, but I didn't. 2 Chronicles 7 and verse 1. When Solomon had made an end of praying, the fire came down from heaven and consumed the burnt offering and the sacrifices, and the glory of the Lord filled the house. And the priest could not enter the house of the Lord because of the glory of the Lord that had filled the Lord's house. The glory of the Lord had filled the Lord's house. It didn't belong to Solomon. It didn't belong to a denomination. Solomon was there as the king, but it was God's house. And when the glory of God came down, the ministers couldn't minister. God said, thanks, I love my house. It's coming down because the atmosphere of the house suited his presence. Now, if you want the glory of God to come to your church, stop putting out the fire of the prophets. Let them prophesy. Obviously, in 1 Corinthians 14, it says, let them prophesy one at a time. Let things done decently in order, but let the prophets prophesy. And let the fire of God visit your place like it did on the day of Pentecost. We want the fire, don't we? Or do we want denominational control?